Everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar series. We'll give people just a couple minutes to join us here. In the meantime, I'll just kind of run through some boilerplate intro and a quick update on our employment situation. Welcome to the April the April month edition of the 2025 Labor Market Insight series from the Idaho Department of Labor. My name is Craig Shaw, and I'm a research analyst supervisor here at the department and your host. Our employment situation, that's current one we have at the moment, is from February. February's unemployment rate fell to 3.7% from January's rate of 3.8%. Our non-farm payroll employment led the nation with over-the-year growth of 2.7%. Our next release will be for March data, and that'll be on April 16th. And we'll be back to our normal release of the third Friday of every month or 2 weeks after the national release. We kind of had an interruption there with the way that the benchmark for these numbers happened. So today's topic is childcare and workforce participation. Our newest and youngest labor economist, Brandon Young, will be presenting this information that he's been researching. This is his first webinar for us since he started, and he's actually only been with us since January 2024, fresh from earning his bachelor's in statistics with an emphasis on actuarial science. And then Brandon, I forgot to write what your alma mater was. Where'd you graduate again?
Yeah, I graduated from Utah State University, just south of the region that I now look after as far as my economic news.
Okay. And you're a Pocatello native, correct? You're from the area?
Yep, that's right. I was born here in Pocatello, and I'm really happy to be back in my hometown, and I'm really proud to be presenting this information to my community today.
Great. Well, we're looking forward to it, and I'm going to turn it over to you, but maybe you can tell us what drew you to this topic for your first webinar.
Yeah, so childcare and workforce participation. I think what's really drawn me is just an interest in taking a look at childcare. And at first, it was mostly as it pertained to inflation. We got a lot of news about inflation last year, and initially, it was just a sort of investigation on how that's affected childcare, but it really blossomed from there into a little bit of a deeper analysis on how that affects workforce participation. So it's an interesting topic, and for me, one of the most interesting aspects has to be history of the topic, which I'm going to delve into a little bit right now as a sort of as an appetizer, I guess.
Okay, and let me interrupt real quick. I forgot to mention that Brandon will be taking questions at the end of his webinar. And if there's anything you'd like for me to ask him, we'll be moderating those questions. But just hit the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom panel and throw those into the chat there, and we'll be happy to pass those on to Brandon. Brandon, it's all yours. Thank you.
Perfect. Without further ado, we are going to talk about the history of workforce participation. So the history of the 20th century is one of really a revolution of modernization of the way we view women in the workforce. So prior to the mid 20th century, there was a pretty long period of women who were not necessarily active participants in the workforce. This is for a lot of cultural reasons. A lot of the time, the responsibility of childcare was solely placed on the shoulders of women, and career options for women were a little bit more limited than they are today, to say the least. But this really started to change coming into sort of World War II era and after, where there was a pretty rapid acceleration of women's entrance into the workforce. We went from about 30% women's workforce participation in 1948 to around 60% in the 90s. This entrance of women into the workforce was also of great benefit to the national economy, just because it allowed us to maintain a pretty stable overall level of workforce participation. So as men's workforce participation started to gradually decline a little bit since the 40s, women's workforce participation really picked that right back up and kept us right at 60 to 70% where it remains today. With all this in mind, though, what exactly happened in Idaho in the same period? So our charts from Idaho show that women's workforce participation when Idaho was still at its founding, right, just as a not even incorporated as a state yet in 1870, women's workforce participation was in single digits. But this is also uh, mostly because there were hardly any working age women in the state at all. As a primarily mining community, those 2,000 women of working age mostly were not active participants in the workforce, except for, according to the 1870 census, 2 women miners, which is pretty interesting, and just goes to show um, that there were still trailblazers in this period, as well as a lot of service sector jobs. But basically on par with the nation, this started to shift around the 40s with rapid increase into the 90s. And today we have in the state workforce participation among women that's exactly on par with national levels at 57%. With these new developments, though, in women's workforce participation and sort of a change in how we see family units as, not necessarily just mom takes care of the children and dad goes to work. What exactly becomes of children in this situation, right? So we have a sort of shifting of what we see women as being capable of, but we also have at the same time a sort of new question that arises. If mom and dad are both at work, what exactly happens to the children? So with that, I'm going to get onto a little bit of a trivia question for you guys. So what percentage of couples in the US both work? A few minutes. Yeah, is it 40, 50, 60, or 70? And we got those results back. Yeah, so the top result was 70, followed by 60, then 50, then 40. Pretty close. Yeah. So that actually sits at C, 60%. So 63% of married couples with children are both employed in the US. And that's even higher for single parent men and women head of household, which sits at about 70 or 80%, which makes sense because as a sole source of income, and you're trying to raise children as well, it makes sense that more people would be active participants in those situations. But with this in mind, if you have most parents both working, what are the top options, I guess, for parents with children for what happens while they're at work? It's kind of a 1, 2, 3 for the biggest options. The number one option nationally and statewide is a stay-at-home sort of option. Now, this is taken from the Household Pulse Survey of 2022, and it's phrased a little bit weird, but for the purposes of this presentation, and accordingly to the Census Bureau's interpretation of the data, we're going to be considering staying at home as either self-care from older children or one parent or maybe even an older sibling staying home to take care of a younger child. Number two is more obvious, is care from relatives at 26% in Idaho. That makes sense, as this can be a low or no cost alternative depending on what sort of situation families can negotiate as far as that goes. And followed in third, and not super close, is daycare centers. So daycare centers only represent about 12% of the childcare situation in Idaho, which that's a little bit of an interesting result because a daycare center might be the most obvious avenue for if both parents are working, what to do with children during that period. And accordingly, if 63% of married couples nationwide, assuming Idaho's on par with that, are both working, how is it that most children are staying at home, potentially with a parent? And, why are daycares just so unpopular when, if you can both be working, earning an income, and the child is being taken care of by a qualified individual, why wouldn't that be more attractive? Well, I mean, if any of you in the audience today has interacted at all with the daycare system or are familiar with developments in that, it's pretty obvious that that's because of the associated price of childcare, not just in Idaho, but nationally. So in Idaho, the cost of childcare has really just increased since 2012 over this recorded decade. The data we have goes to 2022. But all the way back in 2012, you could expect the median weekly price for all age groups to be around $100 a week. This really started to accelerate even before the pandemic in 2016 and 2017. And, after the pandemic too, in 2022, we saw at the top a median weekly price of $166 for infants and $135 for school age kids, which is, anyone under 17. It's not a toddler in preschool. So that those prices are largely associated with two things: the amount of care required for an infant, practically needs around the clock care, versus a school age child who may or may not be a little bit more independent. And number two, this is also heavily associated with regulation as far as how many childcare workers need to be present for each age enrolled, with infants requiring a little bit more care for regulatory reasons. But with this data in mind, this is just a raw weekly price. We saw a lot of prices go up in the same period. That's just how inflation works. But on some items, inflation basically keeps track with wage growth. So is that the case for childcare in Idaho? And the answer is no. So again, back in 2012, at the beginning of this 10-year period that we have recorded, childcare cost about a little above 7% of a family's income. But again, around 2016, this started to really increase up into 2022 with our latest data, where the cost of childcare has been elevated all the way to 10% of a family's income for infants and 8.24% for school age kids. This metric is especially important because the Department of Health and Human Services defines 7% as the major barrier to affordability. So we were sitting at pretty close to that around in 2012, but we've really started to surpass that 7% red line that federal agencies have established as the affordability barrier. With that in mind, is this universal across the state, or does it vary pretty widely from county to county? It turns out it does vary county to county, but maybe not in a super obvious way. So we've got highs and lows as far as counties go. In Latah County, Blaine, and Washington, we have about 10 or 11% of a household income going towards childcare. Whereas for lows, we have Custer County, Jefferson, and Oneida County sitting at just below 7%. But there isn't just a super clear urban and rural divide. So Latah County is an example of an urban county that has very high cost of childcare relative to the state at 10.9%. But Bannock County, which just barely didn't make the top 3 lowest in the list, is right at 7%, and that's also an urban county. So this basically just goes to show that it isn't really just urban and rural issue. It's a statewide issue with variability, but it still is a statewide issue. So with a lot of counties in the state surpassing that 7% barrier to the cost of childcare, 7% of household income, what are the industry implications of this, right? With childcare being so expensive in recent times, we would also expect that to maybe pan out in the industry's numbers. So the number of daycares in Idaho has had basically 2 major declines since 2018. The first being during the pandemic when we lost about 30 daycares all pretty quickly during that period. This makes sense as a lot of people were temporarily sent home from work. And if you're home from work, you can take care of your own children for that period. A lot of work from home situations also allowed children staying at home with parents with a remote work schedule. But that was pretty short-lived, and a lot of those daycares might have bounced back from being just temporarily closed. We don't know how many of those are new versus just daycares that are coming back. But a pretty unique trend that started around 2022 and into 2024 was the overall decline of the number of daycares in the state. So between 2023 at its peak at 459 daycares, I say peak, but it had been pretty flat compared to its previous upward trend. We lost about 45 daycares into the end of 2024. This is a pretty unique trend because we don't see anything really like it for overall US data. We do see a little bit of a decline around the pandemic, but really what's inspiring that tapering off in 2023 and then decline in 2024 in the number of daycares would have to be pretty local. So that's sort of a uniquely Idaho problem. And with this in mind, it kind of begs the question, what sort of daycares are leaving the scene? Is it maybe that we're seeing a lot of smaller daycares consolidate into larger daycares just because maybe economy of scale is in play and smaller daycares can't cut it with lower enrollment? Are we seeing bigger daycares leaving the scene, for some other reason? So when we investigate that, we really find that it's an everyone problem. It's an every type of daycare problem. Between 2019 and 2024, there was very little change at all in the composition of daycares in the state. So we went from 48 to 50 for small daycares. That's a small increase. 36 to 35 for medium daycares, small decrease. But really, there's basically nothing going on to suggest overall statewide that small daycares are just getting eliminated in this period and it's all going to medium daycares. It's an everyone problem. And remember, I say that the composition remains the same. It's still about 50% of daycares in the state are small, but in that same period, just going back, we still lost those 45 daycares. So it's losses among every sort of daycare in operation. If we take a look at the median employment by region, this is a number that describes just about the average number of daycare employees per daycare, broken down regionally. We find that most daycares aren't hiring more or less people than they already were in 2018, with exception of southeastern Idaho and eastern Idaho, which increased in eastern Idaho from 4 daycare workers on average to 7, and southeastern Idaho increasing from 6.5 to 8. So this, for most regions, supports our previous charts showing that the composition of daycares, and that would pan out to average size, really hasn't changed that much. If we go to total employment, again, we can see that for most regions, there was very little change in this period by total employment, except for in southeastern and eastern Idaho, as well as a dip in southwestern Idaho. Southwestern Idaho is going to be important because it by far has the most total daycares and the highest number of people employed in daycares. So that's going to inspire a lot of our statewide trends. But something of note in, again, southeastern and eastern Idaho, the same period where we have a decline in total number of people working in the daycare industry, we had something of a small increase or staying about the same for average number of workers per daycare. So this suggests maybe southeastern and eastern Idaho do have a small trend towards consolidating daycares, having employment decrease overall, but number of employees per daycare increasing, so that favors a little bit larger daycares. But still, that major trend is going to be dominated by southwestern Idaho and the Boise area, which has the most number of daycare employees and has the most daycares overall. And again, that was just a trend that showed a negative employment movement and pretty stagnant number of daycare workers per daycare. And this is just a view of the statewide. As we can see, very similar to southwestern Idaho for the total number of childcare workers, where we saw that same sort of flattening out around 2022 and 2023, and then the decline around 2024. So what we have industry-wide for the childcare industry is the total number of daycares statewide is falling. The number of caregivers employed by those daycares is falling statewide, and it's affecting every type of daycare, every size. So with that in mind, what exactly has been the impact on the labor market from those recent developments? Now we're on to our next trivia question. How many people in Idaho had to alter work arrangements due to lack of childcare last year? Was it A, 22,000, B, 56,000, C, 71,000, or D, 94,000? Okay, what was the answer? Yep, 56,000. Yeah, man, 50% of you guys got it. Yes, it was 56,000. So getting down into kind of the demographics, of that, we had 22,000 parents in Idaho cut work hours with the reason cited being childcare challenges, according to the Household Pulse survey of 2023 and 2024. We had 19,000 parents taking unpaid leave, 14,000 taking vacation or sick leave, and 25,000 leaving or losing their job. So this is compared to 2023, where there was an estimated 5,000 who left or lost their job in that same period. So there's definitely something to this data. It seems that with the recent decline in the number of daycares, number of daycare workers statewide, there have been more people exiting the labor market to take care of their children, with that new gap that's kind of forming in the childcare question with the closure of those daycares. Now, I just want to note real quick that these numbers shouldn't be taken as super literally. There's always there's a margin of error, a give and take. We have an idea of where this might be as far as the numbers go, and that's based off of a lot of things like how many people responded to the survey. But this is evidence to suggest, at least, that the number of parents who left or lost a job has increased in Idaho since 2023. So overall, 36,000 and 20,000 men, 36,000 women and 20,000 men altered their work arrangements in some way to fill that gap left by childcare last year in 2024. Next, we're going to be taking a look at, we have really good data on the number of people going part-time with childcare cited as the primary cause. Nationally, there's been an increase in the number of people going part-time due to childcare issues. We went from about 1.1 million in January of 2021 to 2025, where we have about 1.3 million, just down from the high of 1.5 million in October. We really don't see a super smooth transition sort of increase for Idaho data. We see a fairly unique trend that has these local spikes. So the number of Idahoans going part-time was pretty flat after the pandemic into 2023, all sitting around 5,000 surveyed workers going part-time due to challenges associated with childcare. But this all really started to change in the late 2023 period, all the way into the mid 2024 period, where we had a surveyed peak of an estimated 20,000 people switching to part-time work due to challenges in childcare. And then subsequently, it went right back down to about average numbers for 5,000. It had a small peak maybe in the final quarter of 2024, but it's got right back down to being mostly where we were seeing it previously. And this is heavily associated with the initial loss of daycares in the state. So back in the second and third quarter of 2023 is where we saw that really abrupt loss in the number of daycares, and that coincided really nicely with the number of individuals who switched to part-time. This large spike in 2023 also coincides with a number of grants associated with the childcare industry expiring. So with those loss of grants, there was a real struggle, I think, in the industry perhaps to keep payroll. So that's pretty important, again, in the regulatory environment of daycares, where if you can't make payroll and you have to furlough some of your workers, or if you have to temporarily close down operations for lack of funding, you also in turn have to reduce the number of children enrolled in your program, just for regulatory reasons, right? So when we had that big initial downturn in the industry, that left a lot of people displaced from childcare services, and we likely saw that big initial spike just at the beginning of 2024 due to those causes. Now we do see a little bit of a recovery after that in the final quarter of 2023 as far as the industries go. A lot of them bounced back, maybe from having some employees on furlough, maybe from closing operations temporarily. But after that period had already expired, it seems that people were really turned away from the childcare industry, because subsequently the number of people switching to part-time work arrangements decreased and remained about normal, as we said, while the number of daycares continued its negative movement throughout 2024. So what this indicates is a lot of parents in Idaho were starting to look at those alternatives. If they were in the childcare industry, which is evident by that upswing in switching to part-time, maybe they started to reassess, going to family care, or some parents just staying home entirely. We had all those extra people who just left the labor market entirely, as we stated in 2024, based on the household pulse survey. So maybe that's where a lot of them went. So with those, well, I mean, for the industry, the loss of grants probably caused an increase in the cost of enrollment too. So we don't have data going out past 2022, but it's difficult to see how a decrease in grant money could also result in a decrease of the cost of enrollment. So there's an expectation for the state of Idaho that even though we don't have good data, the movement would probably be a continued upward trend for the cost of daycare. Just going on to the demographics of our available data real quick, this data is really incomplete. This gives us sort of just a vague idea of what's going on. We have very little data on men going part-time as opposed to women going part-time due to childcare issues statewide. But this actually could be accurately reflected in the data. I mean, from the other household pulse survey, we had about a little bit less exaggerated differences. So this really is something that disproportionately affects mothers and their career advancement. So, I mean, we're talking about 20,000 people or so, which doesn't sound like maybe a lot in the grand scheme of things statewide with a labor force of 2 million people. But we don't want to get lost in the numbers here either. We have currently an unemployment rate that just went down to 3.7%, which is quite good for people who already have jobs who are in high demand right now. But on the business level, that really tight labor market, that low unemployment makes hiring a real challenge. And if you have workers who make that decision to start a family, uh, there's a lot of risks to them ending up having to leave the labor market just associated with the high cost of childcare. And that's bad for a lot of people. For for parents who wouldn't otherwise be in that position. Maybe they want to keep their job. That's lost career progression, for that period that they're taking care of their very young children. So, um, there's a real math that you have to get right down to as a working parent in Idaho who's decided to have children or who has children, with just the increasing cost of childcare. And a lot of times it works out in the favor of exiting the labor market to the detriment of a lot of businesses. So the number of children under 5 in Idaho has been flat for the past couple decades. It's about at 100,000 at any given time, and it's expected to stay about the same for at least the near future. So there's a lot of potential demand for childcare, right? And if we could tap into this market of parents who want to work but are otherwise cost prohibited from accessing that childcare, that could benefit total labor force participation. And that would probably be the best outcome too, because not only do you have job creation as far as the childcare industry goes, but you also have that strong maintained labor force that you had previously. So just to kind of wrap up, daycares, they're feeling a pretty big enrollment squeeze with rising prices. And that, has caused parents to take a look at the books, write it out, and, see that maybe childcare isn't the best option for me just because of its increasing cost. And it's causing a lot of people to opt out of the daycare system and alter their work schedule in some way. It could be going part-time. It could be leaving the workforce entirely. And this in turn aggravates what's already a 3.7%, a really tight labor market. And, it interrupts normal career advancement. And, a lot of people who would otherwise want to work or would want to continue their employment or be employed are just simply priced out of that because of their choice to have children and because of the unaffordability of childcare. So in a perfect world, we would have the childcare industry stabilized and prices come down so that everyone who wants a job could get one in this market. But yeah, that was kind of my concluding thoughts. And now we will be moving on to questions.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. Good information there. Thank you for pulling it all together and presenting that to us. Really appreciate that. You kind of mentioned it, but I maybe just in terms of emphasizing it, you're talking about how some parents had to, according to the Pulse survey, there were parents that had to alter their work situation or work schedules or participation due to having to make a adaptation to childcare support issues. Maybe, I guess, kind of speaking more to that a little bit, I guess you did kind of mention it in your other subsequent slides, but do you think did we see the labor force participation decline by much? And in terms of like that number that the Pulse survey is indicating, how does that compare with the total number of workers and that type of thing?
Yeah, so I think it's not so much that there is a big visible decline in workforce participation. You have to keep in mind labor force participation encompasses many, many ages. It could even be people over 60. It's anyone who's eligible to work who is working. So what the focus of this is on maybe the firm level. I think if we this is just an idea, right? But if we took a survey of people who own a business with any level of employment, they can probably point to to one or two employees in the past few years who's had children, right? So just on the personal level, uh, is it something that a business can afford to have people who want to have children just exit their labor force or have to adopt a part-time irregular schedule, you know? And on that personal level, you have all that knowledge lost. You might need to train someone else to pick up on duties associated with the person who's had to leave just for those reasons. So I think it's maybe not a big numbers issue, but it definitely is. It's an issue that uh, you can't underestimate it. It probably will be affecting these businesses.
Thank you. And while you're answering that, we did get a few questions that filtered in. First question is, you indicated that 55% of married two-parent households use childcare at their homes rather than family or centers. Can you expand on that? Are the children unsupervised, or are parents working opposite schedules, casual babysitter? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so that is something that's I think a point of confusion for a little bit of the Census Bureau as well. I base my claim that a lot of those parents are probably present at least part of the time based on the Census Bureau's claim that it was the case. But it was kind of a catch-it-all sort of area because it could indicate unsupervised children just going home after school, which is more probable probably for older children. You're getting to 16 and 17. If you're going home after school, that could be your arrangement. But for younger children, still that was instead of number one option, that was number two. So especially for younger children, that probably did indicate maybe an older sibling or a parent taking care of that child during that normal work schedule versus just leaving a little infant on their own after work. So it has a differing likelihood based on the age group, I'd say, on what exactly that pans out to be. It's a catch-it-all category, though, for sure.
So the next question is, it's a little complicated, but you didn't talk much about birth rates declining. What are your thoughts, or what's your take on a disincentive to have kids because the cost or the unavailability of daycare? Do you think that that's a factor in those fertility rates, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to say. A lot of times you can have, I'm not saying we do, but you can have, you know, some sort of, it doesn't mean it's causal, you know what I mean? It might not be a causal factor. So what this research really focused on, this webinar, was for, I think, parents who already have decided that they do want to have children, or they might already have children, just to get a sense of other decisions people in the labor market are making just based on the high cost of childcare, and also for businesses too. If you have individuals in your workforce who are making that decision, or who already have made that decision to have children, what might the effects be, and if, keeping those people in your workforce is really important, maybe there's something you could do to sort of help mitigate some of that cost, so it's really about decisions. This webinar is about decisions. Once you've made that choice to have children, what are the effects of that on the labor market, and what can be done to maybe mitigate some of those difficult questions that need to be answered after the fact.
Yeah, I think that's thank you for that response. And then in your research and studying this topic, did you come across, or are you aware of government incentives for anyone to open a daycare? What kind of options are there for an increased daycare?
Yeah, so there were a number of COVID era grants that happened that have now expired, but that was largely handled through the Workforce Development Council, information behind those grants and issuing of those grants. So I think if you were interested in learning more about the types of grants that currently exist, that would be a good resource to to follow up with Workforce Development Council. But as far as grants today, I couldn't tell you with any accuracy.
Okay, well, thank you on that. Next question is, with the only 12% for daycare in Idaho, why is it only 12%? Is this licensed daycare only?
Yeah, so that 12% that we're talking about is the percentage of families in Idaho utilizing a daycare service. So that 12% is heavily associated with, at least in 2024, likely an increase in the cost of childcare just due to that loss of grant money the previous year. If prices continue to increase, maybe we could see a further reduction in the number of people enrolling in daycare, just because the math doesn't work out, right? If you're paying over 10% of your income into childcare, you really have to think about your current situation. And that's just on average. It could be higher, it could be lower. But at 10%, as soon as we get over that 7% red line, basically, that the Department of Health and Human Services establishes as the barrier to affordability, those questions on the household level obviously would start to crop up. And that could result in a lot more people just deciding, hey, I'm done with this daycare thing. I'll just take care of my own stuff. I'll have to go part-time. I'll have to get grandma to help sometimes. But, anything that's going to be upward cost pressure on the household is gonna cause some tightening of belts and maybe some people further leaving the childcare industry. Even though, I think the point you're getting to is it's a really obvious avenue if it was affordable, for both parents to be working and to have that offloaded onto an industry with professionals, right? But it's just not a luxury that a lot of people can afford at 10% of their income.
Thank you, Brandon. All right, so next question. Some employers have started their own in-house childcare centers to address recruitment and retention of employees. But that can complicate personal and professional aspects of the life of the parents and their family. Do you see this move as a potential answer to the shortage, or do you think it creates potential conflicts?
I think, it's never such a black and white issue. I think on the one hand, it definitely is the case that could alleviate a lot of the childcare woes that a business could face just based on the number of people leaving to take care of their children. If you have your own in-house childcare offered, it'd have to be up to your own bookkeeping on how much that benefits you as far as workforce retention, and it's probably on a per firm basis. But on the other hand, I can certainly see other issues arising from that. So it kind of just remains to be seen. And I'd love to work with a business to figure that out if they wanted to contact me and take a look at how their turnover is compared to other businesses.
Nice plug for further research, Brandon. Nice.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, that brings us to the close of our questions, and I don't have any follow-up questions for you. I think you did a really good job of covering this information. I know it's pretty broad. There's probably more rabbit holes we could go down. I'm sure some of the people in the audience are wishing we did, but I think this is probably a good overview of it at this point. If you have any questions on this, or if you want to learn more, please feel free to contact Brandon or myself. We'd be happy to work with you on any questions you might have for it. Not to belabor it or keep you here longer, but that brings us to the end of our webinar. Just a reminder, our next webinar is scheduled for Tuesday, May 13th. Stay tuned for our announcement, which we will reveal the topic and presenter. And then before we close off, I'd just like to remind everybody that the Idaho Department of Labor offers many services to employers and job seekers, among which includes free access to labor market information, which you can get at just go to lmi.idaho.gov. And you'll find a plethora of information there. Just make sure you go to the data and tools at the top menu. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a lot of different data dashboards and sources up there. So also, have any questions on that, feel free to contact any labor economists that you can find at the regions option that you'll see at the top of the page. Anyway, with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Please have a great day and an excellent spring, and we will talk to you in May. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you.